Okay, welcome back to Thursday night Congressional Live. We're really glad to be back. First and foremost, we hope that everybody at home is well and safe and healthy and hanging in there. We are really looking back to getting back to some semblance of normalcy here at the club with golf, hopefully in the days, not the weeks, the days ahead. Write this down. If you've got a pen, pencil handy, I'll give you a couple seconds to grab one. But for tonight, if you've got any technical issues, go ahead and I want you to email jmills@ccclub.org. Again, jmills@ccclub.org. And if you've got any questions throughout the event or comments on Mike's presentation tonight that you want to get to him during the event, or questions, we had some great questions last week, go ahead and text them to this number. It's 505-795-1787. Again, 505-795-1787. We hope you've been following along at home, both last week's webinar, but we've got all the great videos and content and hope that's reaching you. If you've got any feedback or ideas, we'd love to hear it. And again, we're just looking forward to getting back to real golf at Congressional in the days ahead. So tonight, Mike's tackling Ben Hogan's 5 lessons and modernizing them. Ben Hogan is, an icon of the game of golf, and his book, 5 Lessons with Ben Hogan, is probably the benchmark for great golf books. So Mike's got a huge task tonight in modernizing those. So without any further ado, your 2016 MAPGA Teaching Professional of the Year. He's been with Congressional for 16 years. I could go on and on about the accolades and so forth, but Mike, the floor is all yours. Have a great time tonight. Enjoy.
Thanks, Jason. I guess I want to start off something similar to what Jason said. I hope everyone is home, staying safe, staying healthy. I know for our instruction team that we all miss being out here with everybody. Again, we want to still stress that we're available to still try to be that outlet. Again, that stress alleviate outlet, whatever. I know just like normal, you come out on the weekends and get away from work and you need some time to do that. We're here, happy to do it. Again, we can do everything right off of your phone. It's been some really good experiences doing that. Again, like one of my favorite books, I think you can say that Hogan's 5 Fundamentals. Here's my copy, one of the original copies. It's probably one of the most found book in golfers' libraries. What I would actually stress, if you haven't seen his previous book, that you want to actually go with Power Golf. Power Golf was written 8 years prior to 5 lessons. And I want to kind of start out before we start getting into the book. Again, when we start talking about fundamentals, this can be really applied to any level golfer. So again, sometimes some of the verbiage I think might come across where it might be sophisticated or complicated. But again, I'm going to try to make it as simple as possible, trying to communicate. And again, feel free to text the number if you have any questions or any comments. Again, so one of the things that's interesting with Ben Hogan's 5 lessons is Anthony Ravielli is probably known as one of the most all-time great sports artists. And when you look at what Ravielli would draw, he actually would shade in the parts of interest and the parts of focus that he wanted you to see, or whatever the author was trying to portray. Some other books that he actually wrote, one was Practical Golf with John Jacobs, which I would highly recommend. Butch Harmon told me that was his favorite book. And then there was one by Bobby Jones, which again, the illustrations are just priceless. So I think I'm a book collector. I have probably over 500 golf books. So I love the old pictures. Again, like it was just really clean and just really convey the message really clear in those old books. Again, what I want to try to talk about and try to help you with is taking what we can pull from the 5 lessons and the fundamentals of golf. and try to tie that into today, a little more of the biomechanics. And again, so when we start talking about the biomechanics, it's actually like how your body is built. And again, we know that there's not one way to swing a golf club. There's multiple ways to do that. And what we want to try to figure out is what's the best method and way for you to, number one, be more consistent, create more power. And again, it feels good. The tie to the biomechanics is actually called bioswing dynamics. And it was created by Mike Adams, who is the #2 teacher in the world by Golf Digest and won Teacher of the Year for the nation last year, and his counterpart, E.A. Tischler. And again, I really find like it's kind of like a blueprint for your golf swing. So we're going to go through, as you can see here on our board, some of the key fundamentals that, again, are described in Hogan's book. But what we're going to start is, again, like I want you to go through and on your pen and paper, with your pen and paper, and just write down grip, stance, and backswing is going to have 3 parts, and then downswing. So under grip, you're going to have top, side, or under. Okay, I'm going to give you a little bit of time to write these down. Next is going to be stance. And again, like we're going to cover 2 parts with our stance. We're going to cover your posture, and we're going to actually talk about the width. I think those are kind of 2 really big questions I get a lot of times from all levels of golfers. So again, so for posture, you're going to either be short, equal, or long. And then width, we're going to be either narrow, shoulder width, or wide. Then getting into our backswing, again, we're going to have 3 parts. We're going to have our pivot, which is going to be front, center, or rear. Then you're going to have your takeaway, which is going to be vertical, and I have it kind of abbreviated here, angled, or horizontal. And it sounds complicated, I promise not. And then the last one on the backswing is going to be your arms, how they're going to track. It's going to be high, medium, and low. And then the last one is going to be your downswing. This is how we're going to engage the ground. Again, really a big conversation topic in golf instruction today is how you're using the ground forces. And we're going to break it into 3 pieces: launch, spin, and glide. Again, so again, they're going to be up here so you can make sure you copy all of them down. And when we go through the screening, what I want you to do is circle which one you think you are. Because what we're going to do is, again, we're going to create this map for your golf swing and be able to go back. And there's going to be some things and some drills that you can do to actually try to bring that into your motion that you have now. All right, so let's start with the grip. Again, I think when you look at every great instruction book, it always starts with the grip. And again, it was no different for Mr. Hogan. And what he said is, you know, great golf starts with a great grip. And I really believe that's so true. Now, what we have to understand is Mr. Hogan, when he goes through and he's talking about the stuff in 5 lessons, he had this shift in how he wanted to play his game. When he was younger and before his accident, he played a big hook. And what happened was he decided he didn't want to play a hook anymore, and he wanted the ball to fall more to the right. So he made an adjustment to his grip. Again, that's something that we can do as well. My preference on the left hand, and again, the left hand is what's going to control my club face, right? So my left hand, I always try to get people to have their thumb slightly to the right of center. And I'm going to apologize for anybody on the call that is a lefty. I'm going to reference everything in right-handed terms. I'll try, if I remember, I'll try to do it left-handed. But again, just remember that I'm always referring into right-handed. I'm sorry in advance. Again, so left thumb is slightly to the right. And what happened for Mr. Hogan is he tried to move his thumb a little more to the middle. And again, that helped kind of soften how much the ball curved for him. And it kind of going from there, I think, again, when I see a lot of players struggle, it's actually their opposite hand. And again, Jason did a great job on talking about Mr. Hogan. And one thing that a lot of people don't know is that Mr. Hogan actually was left-handed. And he went to being right-handed because when he was going through and he was younger, there was a bin where he could get really cheap golf clubs at the golf store. And there was never any lefty clubs. So he decided to go right-handed. And the interesting part is that when you hear a lot of people talk about golf, they're always saying, oh, if you're left-handed, you should play righty because your left hand, your left arm is your dominant hand. The interesting thing is when you start looking up and reading up on Mr. Hogan, he talked more about his right arm and how he would take 3 right arms because he knew that right arm was the piston in the golf swing, and that's where his power came from. So let's talk about our trail hand. All right. So I find a lot of times, I'm going to put my clicker here down. A lot of times when people talk like get their grips, a lot of people interlock. And again, this is probably the hardest thing for anybody to change. It's one of those things where it's really difficult to suggest as an instructor because again, you are worried about people being comfortable. I changed my grip about 10 years ago from interlock to overlap. And what that did was it actually allowed me, so I'm going to show my interlock grip here. You can kind of see how my right hand looks like it's actually like under the club, right? So for me to get away from that, I had to go to what is overlap. And that allowed my hand to get more on the side of the club. And what I found was I had a really bad two-way miss. I would either pull it left or big slice. And my right hand was really the culprit in there. So when you start to look at the pictures of Hogan's grip, you can see how his right pointer finger is directly on the back of the shaft. And again, that's where he's going to be pushing and driving that club. Really want you to pay attention to that when we start talking about how our arms are going to work and how our grip is going to function. When we do this too, the other part that's really important is I want the right hand and the left hand to be connected. So when you do that, it's going to be some pressure pushing down on the left thumb with your right hand. Not a lot, but there should be some pressure. Again, we want them to be connected. I don't want the hands, when you start making a swing, that this comes apart and you get some gapping in there. Again, that's kind of giving up control of the club.
Mike, there was a question that just came in about
Sure.
Where in the hand you should grip the club, just in the palm of your hand or your fingers.
Yeah, so that's a great question. I actually love to do it this way. If you take the club and you grip it down, so you kind of come down here, you can actually see how the club, the shaft of the club is crossing the knuckles in my palm. So it's not in my fingers. It's not all up in my palm. It's actually going on an angle across my hand. So it's actually just above my pinky knuckle and below my pointer finger knuckle. And then what you can do is you can just slide the club down onto the grip. So again, it's on an angle in relationship to your palm. That's a great question. And again, Mr. Hogan, when he talked about the left hand, he wanted those last 3 fingers to have the pressure in there. So again, there's not a lot in the thumb and the pointer finger. All right. All right, so when we start talking about, again, screening ourselves and trying to figure out what's the best grip for you, everybody's going to be different. So what we're going to do is we're not going to need a golf club for this part. We're going to actually get up out of our chairs, stretch. I know we've been on Zoom all day, especially my 6-year-old. So we're going to go palms together, and I want to see the tips of your right hand, right fingers, just a little lower than your left. And what we're going to do, as much as you can, and if you have a partner there watching with you, they can actually assist you with this, because this is the hardest part. You have to let your arms swing back, but you can't let your shoulders move. This is not a golf swing. This is a screen. So what I want to do, watch and notice how my chest and my rib cage is going to stay facing the camera, and I'm just going to let my arms swing back. So again, it's just kind of letting my hands go back behind me. And what's going to happen is your hands are going to go in one of 3 relatively directions. So the first one would be like this. So my palms, my right palm is kind of pointing up to the ceiling, okay? And you can kind of see with the rod here how my hands are. if you do that, if you see that, again, my shoulders staying square, letting my hands come back. For me, this is really uncomfortable because this is not my position. I can feel a really big stretch in my left arm right now. But this means that you are more of an under golfer. Okay. So again, so on the grip, you're going to circle under. If you come back and you notice how it actually matches my spine angle, this is more of a side position. Okay. So again, keeping my shoulders square, letting my arms go back. This is a little side. This is closer to where I am at. The other one is going to be more on top. And now my palm, you can see, is really actually looking down at the ground. So we went from looking at the ceiling, kind of being almost right out in front of me, to being really down on the ground. And you can see how my elbow kind of works different there too. So when we start talking about those positions, under, side, and top, I'm going to use this ball. And John Scott, I promise I will wipe this down when I'm done. So when we think about on top, if I took the ball, right? So my hand's on top. My hand can be to the side, or my hand can be under. So again, so if I think of the grip of the club similar to what the ball, that's the position of my hand. My hand is actually kind of in between one. So my hand is in between side and on top. So mine's called a side cover. So again, I want you to go through and we're going to do a test. So find where you are, what you think. I want you to circle your grip. And this is the best test to do this with. You're going to take your right hand. So take your grip normal. If you have a golf club, if you don't have a golf club, this will be all recorded so you can watch it later. And you're going to actually take your right hand, and I'm going to start with an under position. So I'm going to take my palm, place it under the club, and I'm just going to kind of swing this back, halfway back. And I feel that club face closing a lot, really fast, does not feel good. It does not feel stable at all, okay? So now I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to go on top, okay? So my palm is on top of the club. I'm going to swing that back. Now I feel like the club isn't closing. I feel like it's actually staying open. So again, so now I'm kind of figuring out like what's controlling this golf club. So now I'm going to go more on the side, swing it back. I feel it closing. Feels pretty stable. Again, maybe just closing a little bit too much. So I'm going to turn my hand a little bit more to the top. Now I feel really stable. Again, I know what my grip is, so I'm kind of cheating, but I want you to just do that with, again, it's not too much more than your waist high. And you're going to see and feel that club head rotating, right? So that's going to give you a lot more club head and club face control when we go through our shot. Okay. Any questions on that?
No, so far. Perfect.
Going?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Doing well, Mike.
They must have all turned off.
Yeah.
All right. So next part, we're going to go through and we're going to talk about our stance. Again, so when we start talking about our stance, I find a lot of people don't know really, again, a good player, they tend to be in like their area, their stance width that they should be in. This is a really cool trick that I learned from a great top 100 instructor. His name's Dr. Wright. And basically, and this is kind of when if you have a tape measure, or I actually have a yardstick. So I'm gonna lay my yardstick down here. So I want you to go into what your standard 7-iron distance would be. And again, if for a beginner golfer, if you don't know what your distance from your feet apart should be, we're going to find out. So I'm going to go a little narrow. So I'm actually about at like 14 inches. Again, that kind of feels almost like a putting stance to me. And what we're going to do is we're going to put our hands down to your sides, and we're going to make thumbs up. And you're going to close your eyes, and you're going to just lift your arms straight out in front of you. And I'm not cheating. I promise I'm not even looking, but that is definitely not level. You can see how my right thumb is way lower than my left. Okay. So that means that's not my stance width. I'm going to go actually out to 20. So I'm getting a little wider now. Same thing. Eyes closed. make my thumbs come back up. That's pretty good. Now, I think that might be a little wide for a 7-iron. That might be good for a driver. I might want to mark that one. But I'm going to go in. Again, I know my distance is 17.5 inches. I'm going to go here. Again, pretty level. All right. So again, so that's a really quick, easy way to find out what your stance width should be. And that's going to be important when we start talking about our pivot into the backswing. So that's number one. So stance, we want to make sure our stance, because when we start talking about our balance, right? If I get too wide, what's going to happen is I'm probably going to have limited mobility. I'm not going to be able to turn. If I go too narrow, I'm not going to have a good foundation, and I'm probably going to have some sway in my hips. And that's what Mr. Hogan talked about. He always wanted a good stance, good balance, to make sure that he had a good pivot and a good turn. So when we start going into our next part, this is going to be our posture. So we're going to go, again, hopefully everybody is still on. But I'm going to go in. I'm going to stand at my, again, actually, rewind. So stance width, I would just write down either narrow, shoulder width, or wide. I did not write that down there, but that would be what you would, just to remember what you were. And again, if you have a tape measure, I suggested having a tape measure. If you can measure that, that's great. The next part is going to be our posture. Again, our posture is going to be how much bend we have in our golf swing, in our setup. So what we're going to do, you're going to take your hands on your thighs, and what's going to happen is you're going to go simultaneously, bend my knees and my hips, and I'm going to let my hands go down till just about above the kneecaps. So the tips of my fingers are just above my kneecaps. And this is pretty good for your posture. And again, like how I can kind of mess that up, if I go like that, or if I go too much with my back. Again, I'm engaging my bend from my waist and my knees, making sure that I'm here. So I know that I am equal on my wingspan. If you have a tape measure, you probably will need a partner to do this. And if you can measure your wingspan, most people's wingspans are equal to their height. Some people aren't. Some people have shorter wingspans. Again, like for the gentleman on the call, you'll know from maybe getting like a jacket tailored, you have to get long sleeves, you might have a longer wingspan. If you have a longer wingspan, and I'm going to use the stick, I'm going to make my fingers, my arms just grew 2 inches. God, that would be awesome. If it was that easy. So if I go in and I go down, that's where my tip of my finger would be touching. And again, notice how I'm way more upright versus here, I'm a lot more bent, right? And I have, again, a little bit more knee bend. So if you have longer wingspans, you're actually going to have a little more upright posture. If you're shorter, so we're going to cut my fingers off, and I go down, you're going to notice how I get a lot more bent in my posture. So my back is going to be way more bent over. I'm probably going to have a little bit more knee bend, okay? Again, this is all preset on how I'm built. So if we're going to talk about, it's going to be longer, equal to, or short, okay? Again, easiest way is if you can measure it. If you don't, go down into where your posture, again, if you feel like you're kind of tall, you're probably a little longer. If you feel like you're really bent, it's going to feel you're going to be shorter. Again, most people are equal.
Mike, when you look at the best players on tour like Rory and Tiger and DJ and Brooks, do they have in their stance? Do they all trend one way or they're all different makeups?
Yep. So that's a great question. Mike and EA actually did an article for Golf Digest, and I think they screened 75 tour players. And if you Google Bioswing Dynamics and Golf Magazine, you'll see the picture. All the tour players are kind of standing like this. I can remember it because I remember reading it. And everybody's all over the place. The one interesting thing when we get further into the backswing, how that plays a role into where the players want to swing, it starts to really affect where their arms go. And again, like you got Dustin Johnson's a longer wingspan. Rory, I would say, is probably equal. Adam Scott's equal. The guys who are like, we always say Adam Scott's vanilla because everything is equal, centered. That's why it looks so symmetrically, just like a really smooth swing. And then you get those odd ones like Jim Furyk and Dustin Johnson and stuff like that.
I've never done it, but I can assure you that I'm not symmetrical.
Yeah, in the perfect world, if I didn't have to be socially safe from Jason, I would actually be screening him instead of me showing you
would go
my
from
own
a golf
screen.
show to a comedy show.
All right, so we have our stance. So again, we're going to have how much bend we have and our width. Now we're going to get to, I think this is probably one of the main power sources when we start talking about our golf swing. And when we start looking at the history of golf instruction, back in the 80s, there was a really big push to try to get everybody really shifted back into this back leg. You know, Jimmy Ballard, like you get back and you reach and touch the wall behind you. And again, for some players that worked. But most of the time it didn't. And for me personally, I wouldn't find my golf ball if I did that on the golf course, because that's so far from where I need to be personally. So what's going to happen, I'm going to take that golf club. I got my alignment stick. I'm going to take my golf club just because that's what you guys have. And we're going to lay it across our thighs. And ideally, if you can kind of remember where our stance width was, be great to go to that. So I'm going to go to 17.5 inches here. All right. And what's going to happen is, and this is as much as you can a non-golf move. This is just a natural turn. Okay. I don't want you to think about like load the foot. We're not doing anything golf specific here. So we're going to have the club across our thighs and we're going to just turn. And what you're going to notice, I'm going to do our rear one. So again, we have front, center, or rear. I'm going to start with rear, what you would look like if it was a rear. Rear, you would actually kind of shift over into your back foot. Pretty natural. It does not feel natural for me to do that. Okay? Front, you'd actually kind of feel like you pivot over your left hip. So you can kind of see how my body is stacking completely different from here to here. Now, the one that everybody wants to be is more centered. Again, so you're going to find that one way is going to feel probably a little more natural. I feel like I'm a little more center forward. And that's where if I go back here, I hit huge slices and really I lose a lot of power. So when we start talking about the downswing, this is going to be really important where your power source is coming from. So again, we're going to go into a slight bend. I'll show you my posture here. And I'm going to go either back. Again, I feel like I'm shifting. I got a lot of pressure in my right foot when I do that. Go this way. I feel like I have a lot of pressure in my front foot now. And when I turn, I probably feel equal, but there's still a little more in my back foot if I did it, if I had to measure it. So we're going to go either, are you front, are you center, are you rear? Okay. Again, talking about the backswing. When we start talking about the backswing, we start talking about things where there's tendencies, like I'm just as guilty as any other instructor. I like to see tendencies. I like to have the club on plane. I like to try to get where, you know, we're not using our wrist to take the club back. Mr. Hogan really stressed the importance of more of a one-piece takeaway with the club and the hands and the arms and the torso, all really working together. Again, everybody's going to kind of feel that a little different. But the one thing I know I don't want to see is my hands trying to take the club back, because usually that club's going to get in a position where you can't recover. So when we start looking at, we're going to go back to our grip. So again, we're going to go back to whether you're on top, side, or under. This kind of gets into a little bit of geometry, so I apologize. But when you take your hand, I want you to look at how my hand's going to move. If my hand's on top, my hand's going to bend more up. What does that look like when the golf club's in my hand? The club is going to go more up. If I go on the side and I bend, right, it's going to be more on an angle. Okay? So again, so I got vertical, up and down, angled, or the last one is under, is horizontal, right? So again, so what would those three look like in my backswing? If I'm an on top grip and I come back, again, I'd like to see that one piece takeaway still. So I'm coming back. The club is going to look like it's really getting high quickly. If I'm more on the side and it's an angled, you can see how it's starting to kind of go around me a little bit more, all right? So again, I'm going to do that one more time. And again, I find side is probably, it's not really one bucket that everybody falls into, but that's usually a tendency. But more here. So on top, you can see how quick that club gets really high, really quick. Notice how the club shaft is going to be a little more straight up and down. Side, because it's on an angle, I get a little more angled with the club shaft. You see how this all starts to kind of work together, right? More under, it's going to look a little flatter. And again, like for me as a golf instructor, I always hated that move. But if you're an under golfer, that's how you're built. And if I go and put you somewhere else, you're probably not going to play very good golf. So again, typically, if you're a top grip, right, you're going to be a vertical set. If you're a side, you're going to be an angled. And if you're under, you're going to be a horizontal. No questions? Everybody definitely signed off.
No, we're good. You're good. You're doing great.
All right. So when you start going through it, it's something where when you start hitting golf balls like that, I would stress making just kind of like one-handed, or not one-handed, sorry, but like short swings. I would probably just go into like about a waist high. So again, I'm going to do a top grip here. And when, for me, because I'm not a on top golfer, I should hit a slice. Yep. Because again, my on top position of my hand left the club face open. Now, if I go under, so my hand is more under the grip, you can probably guess what this should do. Yep. Out of position. It probably should have hooked. We're going to click that off real quick.
Mike, question. Should you, and I'm sorry to steal your thunder if you're going to get to this, but should you be working on your grip to help your backswing? How much of this should be dictated by the length of your arms and so forth? And what should you be working on? If you're swinging too much around your body, that third thing, should you work on your grip to help you get it more up on plane? You know, how much of it is your natural body? How much of it is your natural posture? Or is there a way you definitely, you want to get towards this more norm?
Yeah, I think it's when you start talking about working on it, sometimes it just feels more natural. I've had people, when they do make the change, they tell me either it doesn't hurt as much when they end up doing what they're built to do. Again, we can all work around things. I think when you start looking at the trail hand, if I had to say out of anything you take away tonight, the two most important things would be the trail hand position on your club, right? So your right hand, if you're right-handed, where that is on the club, and then your pivot. Because from those two things, you really can take so much away. Again, your wingspan and stuff, like, relatively, that'll go where it needs to go. But again, I think when you start going like what's important when you start drilling, I think the hardest part for people is they're resistant because it feels different from what they've been trying to do. But again, like I want to have accuracy. I want it to go far, and I want it to feel good. Right? Those are my three things.
And you can play. Zach Johnson seems to me to be an around player.
He's an under
Jim
golfer.
gets it up.
Yep.
Furyk gets it up pretty straight, vertical, pretty quick. You can play golf from any of those positions,
Yep.
right?
Yep. So like when we start looking, again, like when I first went through this, I was kind of disappointed because again, I wanted to be like Adam Scott. I wanted to be like centered and I wanted to be perfect. Again, like if you think of perfect, like equal wingspan. So my arms go on my shoulder and all these things. And I wasn't. And the more when you start looking, and they're doing a lot more research just with the tour players, Rory is a side cover golfer, which is what I am. I'm like, okay, that Bryson DeChambeau, he's a front anchor golfer, front post. Like that, like to me, that shows you that some of the longest hitters aren't these like loaded up in the back leg and dry forward. Like Gary Woodland is probably the only one that has the rear post and glides through and really spins. So again, like it's when we start looking at what happens, most of the time you're going to see just shots that feel better and they're going to go straighter, especially with the grip. And that kind of makes people understand like why they should change. I hope that answered your question.
Great. Perfect. Thank you.
All right. So going into our next part of the backswing. So you have the startup, which we talked about. Okay. Again, so this is going to come from our wingspan. I know my wingspan is equal to my height. So my arm should go right across my shoulder. So this is coming back to how we got our posture. So if you felt like you were taller in your posture because your arms are a little long, what's going to happen is you're going to notice when you swing up, your arms are going to be above your shoulders. Okay. Again, so if you're recording, so the camera right now is about hand level, which is where I like to videotape golf swings. When you see that, again, it's going to feel more like it's your arm, my forearm right now feels like it's covering my right ear. Okay. That's going to be your high track. So if we have long wingspan, you're going to be a high track. Opposite of that, if I have a shorter, again, so I'm going to be more bent over, right? And my arms are going to swing more around my body. And this is going to look more like a one-plane swing, like Jim Hardy's one-plane swing. And again, my left arm is below my shoulder. Now when you go, so like to give you an idea, I have a young man that I work with, he's trying to make it on the Canadian tour, and he was working with Mike Bender. And Mike really wanted him to get his arms lower because they were really high. And it turns out that his wingspan is 2 inches longer than his height. So I'm like, he's like, what do you think about that? I'm like, I just let him swing high. Like, don't fight what you're trying to do naturally. And again, that's one less thing he has to worry about on the golf course. So again, so for me, I'm going to let the club come back. And I'm going to have my arm should be covering that right shoulder at the top. Now, a great way to see this, again, if you don't have anything to measure, is you're going to make a golf swing, so you make sure you have everything out of the way. You don't want any complaints about hitting the coffee table. So I'm going to swing back and through, and all I'm going to do, get a little bit of rhythm, and I'm just going to let the club swing right up, okay? And usually your arms swing where they naturally want to go. So if I do that this way, back and through, you can see how my left arm is right across my shoulder, okay? So again, so this is something, I'd love to have this color-coded because if you could say my grip ties into how I set the club, my stance, like my posture, is going to tie into how my arms swing. Again, it's all connected. So once you start finding these pieces, you can kind of have a better idea of where you want to go with your golf swing. Going into, again, like this is where everybody wants, right? This is what everybody wants, to get the power out of their golf swing. So when we start talking about the downswing, what's really important is, and again, like this is one thing that I think the message that Mr. Hogan tried to convey, he was saying lower body, but I don't know if the way that he was trying to convey the message was right. He was trying to stress how at the top of our swing, we want the hips to turn. And when again, like you hear, oh, you need to have your hip speed higher so you can hit it farther and swing faster. The problem with most people is when they get up here and they get to the top and they fire their hips, their hands go with it. So then they have this really big over the top move. And if we know that we're coming over the top, we're going to hit typically a big slice, or I'm going to pull it way left. So what we want to do is just understand that when we start looking at the downswing, and again, this is something I would really stress to a beginner golfer, is the sequencing of the swing. Okay, because again, you get this question all the time. What is the first thing that starts down? If you look at Tom Watson and Jack Nicklaus, they actually, again, back in the day, everybody lifted their left heel slightly off the ground. They both said that they actually planted their left heel. Now, I don't know about you, but my left heel is pretty far away from where my hands are. So my hands are definitely not starting the downswing. So the visual that I always try to paint for somebody is if you think about a train, right? So the train is just sitting there, it's not moving. You have the engine, you have all the box cars, and on the very end is the caboose, okay? So as the engine starts to go, you can hear all the connections of the box cars connecting. It's like, dish, dish, dish. Again, each car starts to go, but that caboose is still sitting back there. It's not moving yet. Hasn't gotten pulled. So when we start thinking about the downswing, I want you to understand that the club head is the caboose, and your left foot relatively is the engine of the train. So when I get up to the top and I start down, my hands and my club are going to stay back here. I think John Scott did a great video a couple weeks ago on how he talked about like how the body would go, but the arms stayed back. Again, kind of creating a little bit of a tension into the left pec. Again, that's the sequencing. I think if you can, as a beginner, if you can understand that we play this game from the feet up and not the hands down, can really, really benefit you.
Yeah, real quick, just if anybody's got any questions, go ahead and just go ahead and text them to 505-795-1787. Again, that's 505-795-1787. So Mike can tackle those before the end of the evening.
It's almost over. You're almost done being tortured. Promise. So kind of going back to Mr. Hogan, what was interesting when you start looking at videos of his golf swing, he talked about how, again, he wanted you to turn, but Hogan did something really kind of sneaky. And if you watch his backswing, before he finishes his backswing, his hip actually starts going left, right? So like he's halfway back here and his body is already moving that way. His locomotive has already started to pull the train. So he didn't have a chance for his hands to go quick, right? To get out ahead. And again, Jack Nicklaus called that flashing hands. He said that was the hard between moving his head, not moving his head, and flashing hands, his hands trying to get ahead of his body. Those were his two biggest ailments he fought his whole career. I think he did a pretty good job. So when we start to look at that, what I feel, again, a lot of people convey now is in your golf swing, there's going to be a bump. Now, what I want you to understand is when I kind of bump my hip, I don't want my whole body bumping and sliding. It's more my hip is kind of bumping. So it's turn, bump, pivot, right? Again, so these are simple drills you can be doing at home, right? While we're all locked up. Here, bump, pivot. Now, what's going to be important is our screen, going back to our stance, is going to actually tell us which part of those is going to be our power source. So kind of going through, and I wish there was a question so then I can have this class. A little sip of water here, so I apologize. So what we're going to do, okay, now we're going to talk about where am I going to get my power. So again, if I had 3 things, I would love, and again, this is where everybody comes to the tee. They're like, I want to be more consistent, you know, like, okay, to be consistent, I want to be more accurate. Number 1. Number 2, okay, well, I want to be accurate, but I also want to have some power, and I also want it to feel good, okay? So when we start talking about the power part, that's where we're going to use our ground. So what we're going to go and do is we're going to talk about my post again. So again, you have down on your board, on your piece of paper, whether you circled front, center, or rear. If you're a rear golfer, one of your key power sources is going to be glide. Again, so it's going to be that hip bump that we just kind of talked about, right? So again, if I'm doing that, and again, we use the force plates, it's awesome to see how you're moving your weight here, and then I pivot. If I'm a center golfer, I'm going to use spin. So if I'm center, I'm going to use spin as probably my key power source. So again, I'm here, I'm going to be turning, right? So again, you start to see these trends where they kind of fall in line. If I'm a front golfer, the last option is launch. So again, if I go here, I'm going to launch. And what Mike and EA did, they actually stole those words from shot putting. And if you watch shot putting, there's 3 different styles. You can spin, you can glide, or you can launch. So again, they don't want to rewrite the book, but again, it just kind of has a simple term. So one thing that I wanted to do, because I feel like this is kind of where everybody wants to work on things, I'm going to ask Jason to safely assist me here. So I'm going to go through, and again, using a basically an elastic band that I graciously borrowed from the fitness center. We're going to go through and try to get some feel for what I need to work on. So my first one, I'm going to kind of hold this right to my hip. And again, like if you didn't have someone that could hold the band, you could tie it to a door handle or something, that'll work. Again, so I'm going to get it a little tight. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to make my backswing. I'm going to glide forward. Now what's important when I glide, I don't want to glide where my knee goes past my ankle. I kind of want to glide, and then again, I want to push up. And I can feel the resistance, right, that I'm getting from Jason or the door to try to make that where, again, I'm loading and I'm gliding forward. Now to do spin, I'm actually going to hook it to my hip here. And what's going to happen, I'm going to make my backswing. I'm going to turn fast. And again, like the more you can get your speed, you can start to feel what's going on your feet, what's going on with your body here. And again, you can notice how my leg, it's not staying bent, it's actually posting and getting into a good follow through. Now, if I'm a launcher, which I am, it's here and push, back and push. So again, that's going to be really easy drill to try to figure out how you're going to engage the ground. Again, I find most of the time right now, that's probably what people are looking for the most. When you start going through, if you have any questions on this, again, email me and go through. John Scott knows this as well. So we all are able to answer some questions. But going through and just trying to finish up here, again, I find like this is one of my favorite parts about golf. Again, I grew up building Legos and just taking it apart and building it together. This kind of gives you that blueprint for how you want to make your golf swing work. So with that,
Mike, there's some great questions. We'll kind of do a lightning round of questions. So
lightning round.
But real quick, the grip. Just can you go through the 3 group grips, kind of the baseball grip, the overlap, and the interlock, real quick, close to the camera, so everybody can see kind of how your fingers are there on the back. Perfect, just like that.
Yep. So again, first grip is going to be baseball grip, which is a 10-finger grip also. So here you can see how all my fingers are actually touching the ground or touching the grip. Okay. When we go into an interlock, the interlock is going to be pointer finger, pinky finger up, and they kind of hook. Again, that's a pretty popular one. That was made popular by Mr. Nicholas, and then Tiger kind of brought it back. Then you have an overlap. Now, I overlap my pinky. So I take my pinky off, slide my hands down, lay my pinky down, kind of in that ridge. Or you can kind of have your pinky down on the other ridge. I have small hands, so I don't have the ability to do that. And the other, again, there's multiple ways, but those are usually your three most common.
All right. So for some of us that are senior golfers, I'm not quite there yet, but my flexibility has suffered, right? So if your flexibility suffered, and for me, sometimes that means taking it back more around because I'm just unable to make that turn. How do you make adjustments for that?
So again, like when you start talking flexibility, I would say I'm probably less flexible than you. You're not going to be probably using spin as your power source. Again, like you're going to probably use more launch, because that's how your body, again, like when you look at kids, that's why kids are on their tiptoes, because they don't have that core strength and upper body strength. They're using their legs a lot. But yeah, like there's alterations. Like if I know that I can't make a turn all the way, again, this is what Ben did, right? Mr. Hogan, he actually took his right foot and kicked it back, so he cleared his hip easier because his right hip was really messed up. They told him he could barely walk, let alone play golf again. So to make it where flexibility issue, I would probably pull your foot back or flare your toes open. And then again, like power source wise, you're probably going to get more out of the ground and launching.
Can you just real quick go over again from a front view, maybe facing the camera, where the backswing stops and then the transition to the front comes?
Sure.
To the downswing, the transition there to the top.
So facing?
Yeah, facing right there. Just, I think it would be helpful to kind of see where in sequence, when I take it back, where the body triggers forward.
Sure.
It's not a go back, stop, freeze, come back, freeze. Like at the top of the backswing, where you talked about that trigger with the hip. Hogan, someone said to Hogan, Hogan said to someone, it was actually my right knee that started coming to the ball. So just show everybody who's watching.
I think, again, I think everybody's going to have a different feel for this necessarily. It's not going to be, again, like you could think about your knee driving, your foot rolling in, your hip bumping, whatever it is, it has to be something kind of like below your belt. But for me, if I'm getting up to the top of the swing, again, the top can be different. It can be here, it can be parallel, but whatever happens, this all has to stay there. Like it's not allowed to move. When it happens, again, I think Hogan was just really unique because he started it so early. But when you get up to the top, as long as you can go and you can get forward, you can kind of let your hand stay back there as much as you can. Your hand, everything is going to kind of transition and swing forward for you.
Can you show, somebody texted this in, can you show the full connected swing starting with the feet, like the full swing, just starting with the feet, maybe hit one or two.
Sure.
That starts and how it looks from down the line.
Sure. My swing or someone?
Your swing. I want to see, you get a full Kepka mode here.
Yeah. So again, I have a little bit of foot flare because I do have tight hips. And that foot flare allows me a little more flexibility in motion and pivot in my backswing. My biggest thing that I want to try to feel in my swing is I honestly want to try to just make sure that I'm staying in my posture. I have a tendency to try to come out of my posture a little bit too much. So I want to stay in my posture. That's my biggest focus. Take down those yardages.
That was pretty good. That's what, a 9-iron? 188 yards?
Not pitching much. Come on, Jason.
So why do so many pros come up on their toes? Like you just said it, where the young folks are trying to get, is it just that the game has gotten to be where if you don't hit it long, you don't register on the money list, and they've got to do everything they can to kill it. And the guys up on their toes are the long hitters, like the Remax long drive champions, or the guys that maybe aren't so big, aren't so strong, but they need to get every yard out of their drive. Is that
Is that
Yeah,
accurate?
I think again, like I think what we have to understand is the golf ball doesn't know how big you are, who's swinging the club that's hitting it. And again, so like when we start talking about using the ground, the harder you push against the ground, the harder the ground's pushing against you. So if I push against the ground harder, technically I weigh more. And if I weigh more, I'm going to deliver more force to the golf ball. So when you look at like little guys, when I'm coaching young guys like 7, 8 years old, I always ask them how much they weigh, because usually if you double that, that's about the max that they're going to drive it. And again, like they're trying to get as much as they can out of it. And I feel like we lose that in our age because we're trying not to move. But yeah, like Justin Thomas, great example. He's on his tiptoes. And he just, again, he bombs it. He weighs 2.2 times his weight. So if he weighs 155, he weighs over 320 pounds to that golf ball when he strikes it.
Still weigh 270 pounds, and I was probably 120 striking the ball.
I wish that equation worked for us, because then I would definitely hit it probably like 360. But
All right, we got 2 more questions here, which can pop in here. When you're measuring, this is a great question that came in. When you're measuring the width of your stance, are you measuring it from your heels, your toes, or the instep of your foot?
That's a great question. Actually, I didn't clarify that. It's actually going to be if you think of like the middle of your shoe. So when I used my alignment sticks here. I'm looking at stance, because this is actually how these machines measure. They measure from the center of the foot. So I'm actually looking at that. So I want like right, and like again, these shoes have kind of like a seam right on the sole that really splits the shoe. And that's really where I want that
Okay,
width from.
and a final question. I think a lot of the folks that tuned in tonight, we saw that were here last week for John Scott's kind of lesson on solid contact and hitting it solid. You guys spend a lot of time together. You talk about the golf swing a lot, so I feel comfortable. I feel like you're going to tie this up pretty good. But how does this lesson and Hogan's lessons and what you've talked about in terms of understanding your biomechanics, how is that going to help me hit it more solid? How's that going to help me produce solid contact more often and get the most out of my game?
Sure. I think that's one of the biggest things when you start looking at, I'm guilty of trying to get people to fit into a mold. When we start looking at the right hand, again, this is where I kind of go back to right hand grip and my pivot. Those 2 things are going to lead really to solid contact. How you're setting and using your wrist, that's how you're going to deliver the club into the golf ball, and you're going to have power. So like all this stuff, when you're talking about like making sure you're hitting the center of the club, I think everything starts with that, like John Scott talked about. But when you're trying to do something that you're not necessarily built to do, so like let's go back to Jason's question about flexibility. If I'm trying to make a really big turn and I don't have that ability, I'm probably going to stand up. Well, that just kind of pulled all the power out of the ground in my feet, which is going to affect my contact.
Awesome. Well, perfect. 1 hour. You did a great job tonight. Thanks for kind of building on what Hogan talked about in his 5 lessons to be a better golfer, and kind of modernizing that. And if, look, the one thing is the golf swing has changed so much just in the last 5 to 10 years with all of this technology that we better understand it. And you and the whole instruction team do such a marvelous job of communicating it. And I know that if anyone watching tonight has any follow-up questions, they can text them in, email you direct. I know you guys have a little bit of time on your hands, unfortunately. So, and again, just a great job tonight. Thanks so much for doing that.